This is my inclusive education journey and represents why I believe I deserve to maintain my high distinction grade. I've included various clips from documentaries I've watched over the semester that I feel encapture each topic that's being covered.
Just imagine a world where all children are included, involved, where their talents are celebrated, where their contributions are recognized.
At the beginning of the semester, I read the course guide before going to my first class, and when reading the AT2 info, I didn't have much of an understanding, but I just wanted to be proactive, so I decided to do a brainstorm about everything I knew regarding inclusive education. This has been something I've done at the beginning of each course since the beginning of third year, and I found it really helpful in my reflective practice. When doing my inclusive education brainstorm, I gave myself 3 minutes to write down everything I knew on the subject, and I had a total mind blank. I was pretty disappointed in what I got down and realised this was definitely a gap in my knowledge. So I went to the first workshop for inclusive education. I'd read the course guide and I'd done my brainstorm, but I still wasn't exactly sure what it was all about. We began by watching a preview of Including Samuel, a documentary, one that I later downloaded and watched in full, that encompassed the notion of inclusive education. It depicted a father's struggles in advocating for his son with cerebral palsy. And I absolutely fell in love with Samuel and the notion of inclusive education, and I knew right away that this was a course that I would gain a lot from if I really took it seriously, which I believe I did.
There's sunlight streaming from his smile.
Samuel likes spaceships. His favorite color is yellow. Does he like sunflowers? I like sunflowers.
Those are Samuel's classmates, his friends. He's going to grow up with these kids, and they'll know him as Samuel, not the kid in the wheelchair.
Something else I fell in love with was this cartoon. I went home that night and downloaded it and stuck it straight in my teacher toolbox. It really sums up what inclusive education is all about and reminds me of Albert Einstein's quote, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." Overall, we discussed the meaning of inclusive education and the fact that it's really a process, not a product, a journey, not a destination. We looked at how inclusive teachers need to be reflective teachers, and I believe this is a strength of mine. Through constant reflective practice, it has become pretty automatic for me and definitely improved my teaching practices. And it's just really good to be able to look back and see how far I've come. We also looked at the importance of relationships in children's lives, and this is something I take very seriously as a teacher. I aim to create rich, respectful and meaningful relationships with every student that I encounter so that they know they have something dependable in their lives.
Inclusion is the best way for every child to learn, not just the child who comes in with a speech issue or the child who uses a wheelchair. It's every single child has a multiple way of learning, and we need to discover those ways.
When we're talking about inclusive education, it's how do we make sure everybody's in, everybody has a place, and that they are participating. How we do that is something that we're constantly learning.
In workshop 2, we were confronted with this big question about diagnosis. And at this point in my learning, I did believe that diagnosis was really important, but as you'll see later in my GSCE, my opinion changed quite a bit throughout the course. This week I started thinking more about me being inclusive in everyday life. I realised that sometimes I wasn't and decided to be more mindful about this. We looked at The Disabled Village, and I found this reading extremely profound and eye-opening, and it's another thing that I stuck straight into my teacher toolbox. It just really helped me to see things from a different perspective. We looked at The Power of Language. The previous week I'd read the Blake article, Education of Physically Handicapped Children, and was really confronted by the offensive language used, such as feeble-minded and dumb. We looked at how language has been used to describe children with diverse needs throughout history, such as subhuman, and it made me really conscious of the language we use today. Even the word gay being used as an insult would be very hurtful to homosexuals, yet it's a word that's used so flippantly. Just a few days ago, I heard someone say playfully to their friend, "You're such a retard." And this is something that I probably wouldn't have even flinched at 6 months ago, which I find really sad, but now I was totally disgusted with it. This week I also looked at the person first handout, and I found myself confronting biases that I didn't even realise that I had. As horrible as it sounds, it was hard to look at the person first and not the disability. I've been challenging myself with this and making sure I look at the person and the ability, not the disability, since looking at this resource. This week was all about the student as the stakeholder, and I believe this is one of the most crucial elements of inclusive education. And after this workshop, I watched a number of documentaries in my own time to try to get a better idea of the lived experiences of students with diverse needs. I've included a number of clips that I found particularly influential in forming my philosophy around inclusive education with regards to student as stakeholder.
I don't care about paste and popsicle sticks. I want math. You know, can I get some math? Something.
A person who has Tourette's isn't like a whole another person. Like me. I'm a regular kid.
Ticks will be a person still. Not like you're bad or anything. You don't know anything. You're still a human, even though you have Tourette's.
I hope that people accept me who I am, and that I don't have to fit in with people. I could just be me. I want other people to think that, oh, well, she's really cool, and she's my friend, she has Tourette's syndrome, whatever.
Kids with Tourette's syndrome are just like any other kid, just with a few disabilities. But overall, we're like you.
Anyone with a disability doesn't like having people stare at them. What are you looking at? I'm just a normal person.
I'm nice and funny, but people don't understand that, you know?
Morgan doesn't fit the mold.
Her needs are so unique, many experts would say she needs a special program. But when you look at her profile, her needs are met alongside typically developing peers. More than met.
Enhanced.
Enhanced, yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Sam, and I just turned 17. So even though there are many obstacles in my life, with a lot of them being created by progeria, I don't want people to feel bad for me. I don't think about these obstacles all the time, and I'm able to overcome most of them anyway. I choose to focus on the activities that I can do through things that I'm passionate about, like scouting, or music, or comic books, or any of my favorite Boston sports teams.
In session 4, we looked at integration aids as stakeholders, and we prepared for our stakeholder interviews. We also watched the YouTube video Molly, primary school student living with epilepsy. Molly was gorgeous, and it was really helpful hearing various stakeholders discuss how beneficial an inclusive environment had been for Molly.
The impact epilepsy has on our family as a whole is extremely unpredictable. We could be organising to go to the movies or go to picnics or even to help the boys with their homework, and Molly has a seizure or Molly isn't well enough, so everything gets put on hold. It's a matter of supporting each other, and these children will blossom. They don't need to be fearful because you've got the support of the teacher and the school and the parent.
This week I started this Y chart. For my last placement, one of my goals was to try to create an inclusive culture within the classroom. It's something that obviously I believe is extremely important and will definitely aim to do when I'm a teacher and have my own classroom. I think that's one of my priorities. So I decided to start a Y chart for what an inclusive classroom should look like, feel like, and sound like. And then over the following weeks before placement started, I just kept adding to it. And it gave me something really concrete to refer to as I was trying to build this culture in my placement classroom. And my mentor was actually really impressed with it. Even though it's extremely simple, she just loved the thought and intent I'd put into my practice and gave me some really great feedback, as can be seen in this excerpt. In week 5, we didn't have class so that we could conduct our stakeholder interviews. I interviewed a wonderful prep teacher who only graduated a few years ago, and I've found her to be a great inspiration, and she gave me some really good insights into inclusive education. Before this interview, I hadn't realised the amount of effort, sweat, tears and paperwork that goes into inclusion, but she assured me it's the most rewarding part of her job, and I think that I'll feel the same way. In session 6, we looked at parents and family as stakeholders, and we learnt about the difference between equity and equality, which is something I actually didn't know beforehand. Thinking about the fact that as teachers we will have to spend more time with some students than others because we can't necessarily treat everyone the same, but we do need to meet the needs of each student. That fairness is not about having the same, but about having what you need. And we as teachers are required to acknowledge diversity and adjust our teaching accordingly. We unpacked our stakeholder interviews in jigsaw groups, and each member of the group actually found that we acquired very similar information in our interviews. So it really did give us a good insight into real-world teaching and what it will be like when we have our own classrooms and endeavour to create an inclusive culture. Roussel read Welcome to Holland, which really helped me to see the perspective of a parent in raising a child with diverse needs. And this is also something I put straight into my teacher toolbox.
His autism forced me to listen to what interested him above all else.
When Samuel was a baby and we first started realizing that he might have a disability, I remember being really afraid. Because all the things you imagine for your child were things I was afraid about. How could he run around on the playground and play kickball when he couldn't run? How could he yak on the phone with his teenage friends when he has trouble talking? How could he get a full education and go to college when he can't hold a pencil? I just couldn't imagine beyond that, and I was very afraid for him and for us.
Are you coming over to me?
So, what's your name?
Cassidy Routledge.
Cassidy Routledge. And where do you go to school?
QJS.
QJS. Cassidy is in Down syndrome. She has Down syndrome. So why should kids with Down syndrome, or any disability, be any different? They're people first, with their own quirks and personalities, and that's how the world should start seeing them. Cassidy learns at a different pace, but so does everybody else. She can't do high jump, but I can name a lot of other kids who can't either. When she was in elementary school, she was reading at a higher level than kids her age who were considered typical.
Other children bring out the best in her as well because it motivates her. She wants to do what the other kids are doing. This little girl who's happy, who's saying hi, who's bopping around like, she's on top of the world. So much of that has been finding an environment at school where she feels comfortable. She just feels like she can be herself, and I know she's with people who care for her and who are going to give her that positive input, and it's helped her to grow.
In session 7, we looked at the teacher as stakeholder and really examined the influence we as teachers have on our students' lives. We looked at strategies for creating an inclusive culture, which I found really helpful. And we also got into our expert groups to share what each jigsaw group found in their stakeholder interviews. And this was an extremely eye-opening and rewarding experience, but I'll discuss this further in my philosophy and selection criteria response.
This one goes out to teachers. I got a question for you. What are you teaching the world? No matter who you are, somebody's learning from you. Everybody's a teacher and everybody's a student.
My name is Megan Baumgars, and I'm here to help you with your kids in your classrooms.
with a disability or without a disability. I have a lot of skills. I have a lot of dreams. What I want to say is to you, don't limit me. Don't limit me by having low expectations for me. Include me in all your students in your circle of learning. You will learn a lot from me. Good teachers teach and learn with their students.
It takes commitment to make inclusion work.
I couldn't imagine a better place for her. She's much loved, she's much wanted, and it also helps that we have an exemplary bunch of kids in here.
I did not have any formal or informal training to have these students in my class. How am I going to reach the valedictorian and reach Alana at the same time? I don't know how to do that. I'm not even sure I reached the middle of the road.
A minute's left.
I can't limit him. I can't do that. Everybody else in life is going to limit him. I can't do it.
And trying hard not to bump into each other.
One of the resources that we do have is we have the people in the building and our time. Let's take a look at how we can use those to maybe look at it differently so we can help more children.
The program originally began for students with special needs, but in about 1990 we realized that for children to learn from other children we needed some typically developing students in the buildings, and it has worked great because both sets benefit from it.
The steps she's taking in class right now are critical. And while Coralwood's dedicated staff plays a large part in this progress, they're the first to recognize that Avery has some other helpers too.
Children provide as much stimulation and modeling as teachers and therapists do.
We look at the students and the needs of those students, and we plan how we're going to implement curriculum given the learning styles and strategies we have within our classroom.
Unfortunately, I was sick and wasn't able to attend session 8. However, I did go through the PowerPoint from home, and I'm glad I did. Something that all of the teachers from our Jigsaw group interviews expressed was the need for more funding and how it really affected all stakeholders involved. So it was great to learn more about the funding process and support services available. I do wish I had been able to attend the session though. In session 9, we looked at assessment and inclusive education. We learnt about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, which is something I had never heard of. And when I went home that night, I watched a TED Talk by Eduardo Braceno, and the whole concept really captivated me, and I just wanted to find out more and more. So I read some articles by Carol Dweck, who discovered the concept of fixed and growth mindset. And it's a concept that I definitely want to put into practice in my future classroom, as the research shows really wonderful results for children. It really brings us back to the power of language and how simply changing one word, for example, saying, "Well done, you must have tried really hard," instead of saying, "Well done, you must be really smart," can switch on a growth mindset.
Some people see intelligence or abilities as fixed, what is called a fixed mindset, while other people see them, as Josh does, as qualities that can be developed, a growth mindset. More important, Dr. Dweck discovered that these two different mindsets lead to very different behaviors and results. In a study she did with Dr. Lisa Blackwell, several hundred 7th graders were surveyed to determine which mindset each student had, and then they were tracked for 2 years. Results showed that the students with a growth mindset, those who thought they could change their own intelligence, increased their grades over time, while those with a fixed mindset did not. It is incredibly important for parents to make their feedback process related, as opposed to praising or criticizing talent. If we win because we're a winner, then when we lose, it must make us a loser. The moment we believe that success is determined by an ingrained level of ability, we will be brittle in the face of adversity.
So this is my GSCE. It is a bit of a mess, and I tried to redo it to make it look neater, but I just couldn't achieve the same authenticity, so I've left it as is. Each week I've used a different coloured pen so that you can see the progression that I've made in my understanding and beliefs surrounding inclusive education. One thing I found quite interesting was that at the beginning, when I was first constructing the GSCE, I put diagnosis and condition as two of the main elements of inclusive education. However, over the course of the semester, I noticed that I barely added to these or really connected them to any other elements other than stakeholders, and funding was a big one. But it's really made me see that diagnosis and condition aren't that integral in terms of inclusive education. As a teacher, I know that I will definitely come across, and in fact have already come across, students strongly suspected of having a condition but going undiagnosed. And this really shouldn't change pedagogy. Either way, diagnosis or no diagnosis, we need to be teaching with the needs and strengths of each individual student in mind and really looking at the person first, not the diagnosis. And I think that's one of the key things that I've learnt over the course. So as I said, initially I believe the key components of inclusion were diagnosis and condition, as well as equality, stakeholders and support. This has changed, and now I struggle to keep it down to just a few. But I think attitudes is definitely one of the most important things. Teachers' attitudes, schools' attitudes, children's attitudes, stakeholder attitudes, society, they're all so important in encouraging a growth mindset and really supporting the growth of the student. I would still say that stakeholders are a key element. They really are central to inclusion, but more specifically, I'd say relationships. I think relationships are the most important thing in a child's life and are a vital form of support for them. And as a teacher, I take this really seriously and will endeavour to form meaningful and respectful relationships with every student I encounter, so that they will just know that they have a safe place and someone to talk to. Another one is the needs of the child. That's an extremely key element. It really is the key to inclusion, is catering to the needs of each individual child. And instead of making the child mould to the system, we need to mould the system to the child. Another thing is building an inclusive culture in the classroom. This will definitely be a priority in my future classroom and really links closely to the other key elements that I've just mentioned. Relationships and attitudes, they're all necessary in achieving an inclusive culture in the classroom, as well as catering to the needs of the students. You can't have inclusion without catering to the needs of each student. I've gone back and critically looked at lesson plans I've done in previous years, and it's really great to see how far I've come and how I would now change it based on my understanding of inclusive education. In this particular lesson plan, I did not set clear expectations of the students. I would now be explicit with the learning intention and success criteria so that students understand exactly what they need to do and how to be successful in their learning. I didn't deliver it in a way that was multisensory. In fact, it is heavily loaded with verbal instructions and really no visual cues that students with any type of auditory disorder would find extremely challenging. There are many practical classroom strategies that I now aim to use, as will be seen in the selection criteria component of this assignment. In order to see how my understanding of inclusive education progressed over the semester, I decided to do another brainstorm like I did at the beginning of the course. Again, I just gave myself 3 minutes to write down everything I could think of about inclusive education, and I was so proud that my learning was just effortlessly flowing through my pen onto the page. I filled the page completely and could have easily kept going, I think. I probably would have gotten more down if I wasn't so worried about it being neat. But yeah, I think this clearly shows the progression when you look at the first brainstorm that I did to this one, and that's only given myself 3 minutes, so I'm really proud of my learning. I have signed up for 2 AEU professional development seminars that relate to inclusive education, the only 2 that I could actually find, just because I really want to learn more and continue improving my own teaching practice. So I signed up for the Student Identity and Wellbeing seminar and the Sexual Diversity in Schools seminar.
That sense of growing up in a community and that everybody has some value and role to play, I think is absolutely critical. And if it doesn't happen in a classroom, then I don't know where else it will happen. As we learn that practice, our beliefs will change over time. And we need to learn how to do that practice and craft of teaching in this context well. And when we do that, then we're able to actually have an impact with kids and change attitudes over time.
By the student, by the skill. Those 6 words encapsulate for me specifically what it is that we do within a professional learning community. And I'm totally convinced that students do better in an inclusive setting than they would if they were segregated or separated into separate classes.
I believe at my core I am inherently inclusive in my interactions with students and everyone I encounter. This inclusive education course has really made me aware and determined to make a difference in the lives of my future students. As Maya Angelou so eloquently said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never...
Light up my world like nobody else. The way that you flip your hair gets me overwhelmed. But when you smile at the ground, it ain't hard to tell.